Hello, welcome back you guys. It's time to continue on the tutorial. Here I show you how to build your piece control map and we're jumping right into part 3. In this tutorial, you're going to learn how to finish setting up your team holding room mechanics. Plus, I'm going to show you how to finish setting up your game level mechanics. Now this tutorial is pretty long, so if you feel that you need to pause, feel free to do so. So that you don't miss more tutorials like this, be sure to drop a sub. That way you can make more Fortnite creative games. In addition to that, if you missed part 1 and part 2, don't worry, the links will be posted below, so be sure to check them out. Alright you guys, let's go ahead and get right into it. Let's go! Welcome back to part 3. Hopefully we'll be able to get through the rest. We have quite a few things to get through. Before we get started though, I want to make sure that I touch base here. These clocks, when you're doing this, you can also set it to allow class any. So just be sure to keep that in mind. If you have it set to a class, it's going to work either way if you have it set to a class or set it to any. So I just wanted to make a note of that. So we did the entire middle section in part 2, and if you missed that, be sure to catch the video. The link will be down below. Let's go ahead and move on to the individual weapon rooms, and these are basically the team holding areas, and check out the mechanics. Let's do it. Alright, so first starting with the mutator zones. Alright, so you'll notice that each weapon room has 2 mutator zones, and the first one is for when the game is going to start. So this will enable once the checks are complete and there's a player in each room and it's good to go. This will enable to send them to the game start area. The one beneath that will only enable when there's not enough players. Now if you go way up, you're going to see one more mutator zone, and this is the game end mutator zone, and this will only enable when it's the last round. So let's go ahead and start with the mutator zones for each weapon room area, and then we'll make our way to the game level. Alright, mutator zone team 1 game start. So you want to make sure that they cannot fire their weapons and so on. And depending on how big your area is, make sure that the zone does encompass the entire area. What's important is you want to make sure that it's enabled during phase none and that it does affect the players. You can see the rest of my settings here. And there you go. If you don't want the effects, you can turn it to disabled, so that's truly up to you. Let's go ahead and move on to the functions. So this will be disabled when the round ends. That way, if they are teleported back here, they will not be sent back to the game start area. So I have it set to disable when receiving from mutator zone round end on player entering the zone. We're going to enable when receiving from timer device starting game, and this is the timer that we went over during part 2, and it's going to enable on success. In addition to that, we do have one more timer that's going to run when the game is in progress, and that's when they're teleported back to this room. We're not going to use the same timer that we did before, we're going to use a new timer. So this is the timer device game in progress, and that's going to enable the mutator zone here, again on success. Alright, let's take a look at events, and we only have one event. When this device is enabled, it's going to teleport the player, specifically team 1, to the game level area. Alright, cool. Alright, let's go ahead and go down to the bottom one, and this is when there's not enough players. Keep in mind these settings can be whatever you like depending on what you're doing for your area. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down so you can take a look. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the functions. So the only thing we have is enable when receiving from player counter weapon room 2 when the count fails. If team 1 enters this room and no one enters team 2's room, meaning the count will fail, then this mutator zone will enable and teleport them back to the game end area. So I have on player entering zones in event 2 teleporter game end and teleport for the event to send them back because there's no one for them to play against, so the game cannot progress. Alright, let's take a look at what's going on inside the room. So I do have a few things here just for fail-safe purposes. But you guys may be able to just do it with teleporters. So first we have the teleporter that they enter after going through the team picker. And that'll be the very first teleporter here. This is teleporter weapon room team 1-1. And when they go and pick a team here, they're going to be teleported to this first teleporter. So let's check it out. I have teleporter group none, teleporter target group none, enable during phase all, team all, and I'll just go ahead and go through it so you guys can see. Keep in mind a lot of these are optional. If you want to have it on or off, you can do that as well. And let's take a look at the functions. We have disable when receiving from tracker elims round tracker 2 on complete. So that basically means we do have a tracker that's tracking the amount of rounds. We only have 2 rounds here for this tutorial. Once they complete the 2 rounds and that tracker completes, it's going to disable this teleporter. We have enable when receiving from mutator zone rematch. So this is when the game ends and the player wants to rematch, then we need to re-enable this teleporter so the loop can continue. So that I can show you guys what I mean, when the game ends and they're sent here to the game end area, if they choose to rematch, they're teleported back to the team picker area. That teleporter, since we disabled it after they completed 2 rounds, we need to re-enable it so that it can continue the loop. So that if they then want to play again and go through the player counter again, they can go ahead and re-enter this teleporter. If they complete another 2 rounds, then this will disable and they'll go again through the same loop. Lastly, we have teleport when receiving from, and we have quite a few here. Most of this is fail-safe. I have the class selector on team switched and class selector team 1 on class switched. This is again in the team picker room. When they pick their team, they'll be teleported here based upon 1 or 2 of these events. You don't have to list them both. I just did for fail-safe purposes. So be sure to try it out and see what works best for you. And then teleport when receiving from mutator zone round in on player entering the zone. And that's the mutator zone that's going to be in the game level area. Alright, next up we have teleporter game in progress. And team 1 has one as well as team 2. I felt it would be better to have 2 separate teleporters compared to just using one. However, once you understand the system here, you could try it with just one to see if you can just kind of give them the loop through just one. It's truly up to you, but I feel this works best with 2. So this basically means while they're in there and they're battling, when the game or match ends, so they're going to be teleported through the game in progress teleporter, compared to being teleported here to the weapon room teleporter when they come through the team picker room, which is this room over here. So when the match ends, they come to this teleporter here, the game in progress teleporter, and let's take a look at the settings. It is enabled during phase all, and you want to make sure this is specifically for Team 1. You can play visual effects or sound effects if you like, and so on. This will be for the selected class of 2. And everything else you can choose what you like. Make sure you do put no for skydive after teleport. Now moving on to functions, we're going to disable when receiving from tracker or limbs round tracker when it is complete. And that's the tracker or limbs round tracker 2. It's going to enable when receiving from Mutator zone rematch. So of course we have to turn this back on again as well if they do decide to rematch and the game has ended. It will teleport when receiving from Mutator zone round in when the player has entered the zone. Now we have quite a few events. So on teleported send event 2, enable the trigger game start, that way it can begin the count. It's going to start the game in progress timer, and this is going to say waiting for players. At the same time, we want it to remove the elimination tracker, that way it doesn't hinder the player's view. You can, of course, if you want the tracker to stay there, you definitely can. And you can omit this if you like. Next, we want to begin the count. And what I mean by that is the player count. We want to ensure that players are still in the game. So when they're teleported, we're going to send a trigger to the trigger game start. And that would be 1 trigger for each player. So for example, if Team 1 wins and they come back to this room, it will count as 1 trigger. When Team 2 loses and they decide to leave the game and they do not come through their teleporter, it will not count as a trigger. So there will only be 1 player left in the game. And when that happens, it's going to send whatever player that's remaining in Team 1's room to the game end area and say there's not enough players. So we need 2 triggers to send an event before the game can begin again. And then I have item granter here, and this is optional. I just have it here because I duplicated this teleporter. So if you want to, let's say, give them different weapons, you can add a whole completely new item granter here that will allow you to give them a whole different loadout for the next game. Alright, so let's take a look at the player spawner. As you see, we have a player spawner here, but we also had some in the pregame. Now these are only pregame spawners. The players will not spawn here again, even if they are eliminated, because it's set to pregame only. So we need additional spawn pads just in case there's some issues with them not coming through the teleporter. So I use this as a failsafe. It's not 100% necessary, but it is always good to have a backup. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the settings. And I named this player spawner team 1-2. Alright, so I have it enabled on gameplay only. The player team is team 1, and we want to make sure it's assigned to class 1. We're not going to use it as item start, and it's not visible in game, and so on. We do want to enable this only when the team is switched, and that's when they go through the team picker room. So in events, I have on player spawn, it's an event 2, and I have 2 triggers. And I have one for, I believe this is for round 1, and this is for round 2. So as a fail-safe, you know, if let's say they come through here on the first round, we're still good to go. And if they come through here and there's something that happens, something glitchy, and they still come through here, it's still going to complete the system. If you are doing well with just the teleporters, you can omit this entire thing. But this is just, like I said, a failsafe. Alright, next up we have the player counter. And this is player counter weapon room team 1. And these counters are used to compare the players against one another. So basically, we want to make sure there's enough players for the entire game. So if, of course, team 1 enters this room, we want to make sure we're checking team 2's room and vice versa. So let's go ahead and go through the settings. I have compare player count equal 2. The target is 1 player because this is a 1v1 for this game. If you're doing more, you want to make sure you set your player target count accordingly. Compare game start is no. Compare on count change is no. We're going to transmit on player counted every time. Transmit for on compare result change is last instigator. Counted team is any. Invert team selection is off. Counted class is any. Invert class selection is off. We're going to enable always. Info panel visible is on. Icon scale is 3.0. Info panel icon is player icon. Base color is whatever you like. We're going to be using a zone, and it's going to be a box. Make sure your zone is big enough to fit all players. Size units is tiles. Zone width is 11.05. Zone depth is 10.8. Zone height is 6.8. Zone offset is 0% and so on. Let's go ahead and take a look at the functions. So we have compare players to target when receiving from. And that's that timer device. Opponent checking team 2's room against this room. So when that timer has a success, then it's going to check against this room. After the round has ended, and there's a timer we have that says waiting for players. When that timer completes and it is successful, we're going to go ahead and compare to target to make sure that the second player enters their room. So that's the same example that I gave before. If, let's say, team 1 wins and team 2 is like, nah, I'm out, and they leave the game and they don't go back to their room, then when this runs a comparison, it's going to send this player waiting in this room back to the game end because there's nobody in this room. Now we have a few events, so let's check them out. When the count fails, we're going to enable that mutator zone to send them back to the game end area. They'll say, hey, there's not enough players. Would you like to make it to another game or something like that? Or they can go ahead and, probably start over. Then we have on player counted send event 2. We're going to make sure we trigger the game start. That means that there's enough players in this room. We're also going to enable the game in progress waiting timer. We're going to trigger again the game start 1. So again, I have 2 triggers and they're happening at different times. This is happening when they first come into the game. This is happening when the game is in progress, when they come back from the game, and so on. Because keep in mind, these triggers are enabled and disabled at certain times, so that's why they're listed here twice. Now this is also connected to a player counter in the team picker room. So basically it's going to increment target player count when that player runs through the team counter here. And then that 0 will turn to a 1. That would mean that there's 1 person in that room. And that's really good to display how many people are on each team. And since this is a 1v1, it'll just show 1 person's in that room, 1 person's in that room. And let me give you an example. So let's say 3 people run through here. And you can see that it's set to increment that player counter whenever a player is counted. No matter the amount, it's going to increment this player counter to match the number of players that are in that room. Alright, so that does it with the setup for team 1. And let's go ahead and do team 2. It's really similar, except of course everything's team 2. But let's just go through it. Alright, we got our mutator zone for team 2. Game start. And I'll go ahead and slowly go down the settings so you guys can take a look. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to functions where we want to disable when receiving from the mutator zone round in. And that's when the player enters the zone. It's going to enable when receiving from timer device starting game. When it succeeds, it's going to enable this mutator zone to send them to the game. And then when they start another round and they come back again, we want to re-enable this device because it's going to disable, remember? We want to re-enable it on the second round so it can be ready to send them back. Alright, let's move on to events. When it is re-enabled, we're going to send an event to teleport them to Teleporter Game Start Team 2 to teleport them to their area in the game level. Alright, we have Mutator Zone Team 2, not enough players, and you can see it's quite the same. But we have some major differences when looking at the functions. This will be enabled when receiving from the player counter in the weapon room from Team 1, only when the count fails. What that means is if a member from Team 2 comes back and they win, and Team 1 leaves the game or they don't want to play anymore, something happens, Wi-Fi, anything like that, that means the count there is going to fail and enable this zone to send them to the game end area and tell them it's not enough players. And then we have the event, which is the teleport event on player entering zones in event 2. And when they're teleported here, it's going to enable the teleporter that's in the game end area and teleport them there. Again, you can name your teleporter whatever you like. I named mine's a super long name. It's Teleporter Game In Weapon Room Count Fail. And that tells me everything that it's being used for. So it kind of helps me keep everything in check. But it's always best to opt for smaller, smaller characters when naming your devices. So I highly recommend that as well. Alright, let's take a look at the teleporters. Again, you guys know about the failsafe. I won't go over this one. We'll just focus on the teleporters now. So we have the Weapon Room Team 2. This is the teleporter they come through when they pick their team. So when they go through here, they are teleported here. And let's take a look at the settings. This is enabled during phase all. This is specifically for Team 2. We're not going to change teleporter target. Link to target is no. Teleporter rift visible, no. Play visual effects, no. Play sound effects is yes, but that's optional. Conserve momentum is yes. Face player and teleporter direction, I will put that to a yes. Effects class only selected. The class is 2. The radius is off. The relative position is yes. Skydive after teleport is no, and it is maintaining momentum during the teleport to event for world. Let's go ahead and take a look at the functions. We have disable when receiving from tracker a limb's round tracker 2. When it is complete, it's going to disable this device. That means they have completed 2 rounds. So we don't need to come through this teleporter anymore. It's going to enable when receiving from Mutator Zone rematch. That way you can restart the loop when the game is over. So we're going to teleport when receiving from class selector Team 2 when the class is switched. And you can also do class selector Team 2 when the team is switched, just to ensure that they come here. And when they are teleported, you want to disable the trigger game start for round 2. You want to also start the timer that's going to check against the opposite room, which is Team 1's room. And then you want to grant them their weapons. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the game in progress teleporter. Everything else is quite similar. You want to make sure it's set to the team. You want to make sure it's also select to the class. So for functions, we're going to disable this from tracker lens round tracker 2. And if you're not quite sure which tracker that is, I do highly recommend you watch part 1 to see how those trackers link up to this. You want to enable when receiving from Mutator Zone rematch, and again that's when the game ends. They're both sent back to the game end area and they want to rematch and start the loop again. You want to make sure this is enabled so they can go through it again. Now this is going to teleport when received from Mutator Zone round in when player entering the zone. Alright, so we have a few events. We want to re-enable the trigger that's going to be responsible for the count, and that's when they're teleported to this device. We also want to start the game in progress timer that says waiting for players, and that's because when they come in, they're starting a new round. We want to make sure the other player comes into their room also. We also want to remove the tracker. Like I said, again, this is optional. I just think it looks better because I don't want the tracker to be shown unless they're in an active match. We also want to count them, so this is going to count as one trigger when they come through, and when they're teleported, it's going to trigger the game start trigger. Now keep in mind, we need 2 triggers to start the game start timer, and if we don't get that 2 triggers, then the event will send them back to the game end area because there's not enough players. And again, I do have item granter here because I did duplicate from the previous teleporter, and this is optional. You don't have to have it here again. If you want to give them a different loadout, you can definitely do that for round 2, and that would be really cool. Alright, let's check out the player counter. We have compare player count equal to target player count 1, compare at game start no, compare on count change no, transmit on player counted every time, transmit for on compare result change last instigator, counted team is any, invert team selection is off, counted class is any, invert class selection is off, enabled on phase is always, info panel visible is on. There is an icon scale that you can set, and color as well. Make sure the zone is big enough for all your players. I set this zone to a shape of a box, and so on. And then let's take a look at the functions. We're going to compare players to target when receiving from the timer game in progress when it says waiting for players on success, and it's going to compare to this count. If this count fails, then it's going to send an event, and we'll see that here shortly. If this count succeeds, then it's going to be dependent upon the other room if it's going to still succeed. If the other room has enough players as well and they both succeed, then we're going to go ahead and start the game and they can start the next round. We're going to also compare when receiving from the timer device when we check team 1 against team 2, and that's when they first come into the game. So just so you guys can understand, we have this happening during 2 separate processes. This happens during round 1 when the game starts after they've just picked their teams, and this happens during round 2 when they come back from completing their match. We're going to enable when receiving from teleporter team picker 1 when teleported. So basically that teleporter is located in the team picker room, and this teleporter is responsible for enabling and preparing a bunch of devices that we're going to be needing for the entire round. Alright, so let's move on to events. So I have it set to when the count fails, we're going to send an event to the Mutator zone to enable. That way it's going to send them back to the game end area. When the player is counted in this room, again we have to send a trigger. Then we're also going to enable the game in progress timer. This trigger is for the first round. We're also going to register the player reference device. So this thing is doing a lot of things. It's doing events for round 1 when they first pick their teams and come in. And it's also doing events when the game is in progress. So you got to keep in mind that these are happening at different parts of the game. So when we enable and register that player for the device, when a player is counting, that's at the beginning of the game. That's when they come through. They run through here, and then this device will pop up showing that they're registered. We're also going to increment the target player count in the team picker room, showing how many players are in this room, just like team 1. So when the player runs through here, you see how it says 0, it's going to change to 1. Alright, and that's it there for the player counter. To complete this section, we have one big Mutator zone at the top. So let's check it out. This is the game in Mutator zone. This is when they've completed both rounds, or however many rounds that you want to set. For tutorial purposes, we're just doing 2. And we need them to go to the game end area. Now you notice that we have 2 game end mutators. We have them over the team weapon rooms or team loading rooms, and we also have it over the game level. And that is because when a player is eliminated, they're going to come back here before they go here. And then the winner, since we disabled those teleporters and the Mutator zones, well, they're going to stay in here. So this game in Mutator zone is going to also enable to send them back to here, to where the game ends. So let's check out the settings. You want to make sure that this Mutator zone is set up so that there's no weapon fire, no building, and so on. You want to disable this when coming from teleporter team picker room 1 on teleporter, and that is this teleporter here. When they come through after the pregame is over and the game is started, you want this to disable that zone. So it's basically going, like I said, this teleporter here is doing a lot of setup for the entire game. And then we're going to enable when receiving from tracker elims round tracker 2 when complete. So this is when they have completed 2 rounds. We're going to enable this Mutator zone that will then teleport them, because they're inside the zone, to the game over teleporter. And that will be the game over area. All right, now that we covered the entire team weapon room or holding room area, it's time to move on to the game level. And then once we're done with that, we can move on to the game end area, and then we can run a test. Alright, so let's go. We're going to start top to bottom, and let's check it out. Alright, here we have our Mutator zone game end for the game level, and let's check out the settings. We want to make sure that they cannot fire or build at the time this is enabled. And you want to make sure this zone is big enough to cover your entire game level. You want to enable during phase none. Affects player yes. Affects creatures yes. Affects guards yes. And of course that's optional. You can turn those to no. Those are the default settings, so it's alright. And here you can see the rest. And let's see, we have functions. Disable when receiving from teleporter team picker one that I just showed you. And then we're going to enable only when they complete both rounds. When they complete both rounds, they're going to be teleported to the game over area. So whoever's left in here will be teleported there. Next we have the mutator zone for when the round ends. Settings are similar to those above. So let's take a look at the functions. We're going to disable when receiving from tracker or limbs round tracker 2 when it is complete. We're going to also disable when receiving from trigger game start 2 when it's triggered. And we're also going to disable when receiving from the team picker room when they are teleported. This will only be enabled when received from the tracker limbs 1v1, and that's when someone gets an elimination. This is going to be enabled, taking them back to the team weapon room so they can get started for our next round. When it is enabled, we have some teleport events going on here. We have Team 1, Game Over Winners, teleport. Team 2, Game in Progress, teleport. We're also going to disable the Mutator Zone, Team 1, Game Start. And disable the Mutator Zone, Team 2, Game Start. And you can see the rest here. So some of these may look very familiar. I'll just go ahead and scroll down here for you. And there you go. If you are having difficulties with keeping up with the way I've named my devices, and I do apologize, in my next tutorial I'll make sure that I do it just a little bit better instead of using acronyms and that kind of thing, then be sure to check out the spreadsheet that I'll have here for you that you can access so that it's easier to flow with. Alright, so you're going to see that we have a lot of explosives here in this room. And this is here for the build reset. So I don't need to go over each settings for each one, but we can take a look just at one. And this is basically going to ignite in between the rounds and at game end. So let's take a look here. We have health is indestructible. Display damage numbers is off. The blast radius is a 1.5. There's no knockback. The structure damage is at the max, which is 5,000. The blast line of sight is no. Explode on proximity range is off. Proximity delay is off. Ignore team for proximity is none. Time to detonation from game start is off. Play audio is no. Range visualization is explosion radius. Visible during game is no. Collision during game is off. Collides with everything. Show health bar is no. Play audio is no. Device mesh is set to explosive barrel. So let's take a look at functions, and you can see here we have explode when receiving from timer device when starting the game. It also explodes when the round is complete. When the game is in progress and they went back to their room, it's going to clear this room out. And when waiting for players, we need to reset this when they are teleported to the game start area, and that's for both teams. The game start teleporters are here. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. We have team 1 game start. You want to make sure it is set to team 1. And the rest here is optional. It only affects the selected class, which is 1. The radius is off. Maintain relative position is yes. There's no need to skydive after teleport. And the momentum during teleport to event is world. Alright, let's take a look at functions. We're going to teleport when receiving from Mutator Zone Team 1 game start. And that is when we have a successful player count and we have enough players in the game, they'll be teleported here. We have quite a bunch of events, and this goes for each explosive device, as you can see here. We're also going to disable the waiting for players timer when they come through here. We're going to assign the tracker a LIMS 1v1 tracker. We're also going to register a checkpoint pad. Now this is optional. This is if you want to include a spectate area. Now we'll not be going over that in this tutorial, but you see I do have it set up already. Since it's a 1v1, I really wouldn't have to go through that. So just want to throw it in there. We also want to assign the tracker to all. So this is the tracker elims round tracker. Again, this is tracking not the eliminations, but tracking the rounds. So keep in mind this tracker elims 1v1 is only counting one elimination. So when they make one elimination, that means that that player wins, and that means that they've completed one round. When they make two eliminations, it completes this tracker and the game ends. If you didn't see how we set up the trackers, be sure to watch part 1, and the links will be down below. Check it out. Alright, we're also going to assign tracker for team 1, and we're also going to disable the timer device choose team display. Now this timer device is basically this timer device, and I have that there because at the time I was running tests, that timer was still showing up. So we want to make sure it doesn't show up. You might be lucky. I'm not sure. I'm on a PS5 when I made this tutorial, and I was having that issue. So I just set it to disable here, and it looked like it was pretty successful. Let's take a look at Team 2. So again, you want to make sure that Team 2's game start teleporter is assigned to Team 2. I'm just going to go through here. Be sure to slow it down if you need to. And for the class, we have only selected for the affected class with a selected class of 2. And again, momentum during teleport to event world. We're going to teleport when receiving from Mutator Zone, Team 2, game start. And then, of course, the same events. We're resetting the explosive devices when they come back in. We are disabling the game in progress timer device that says waiting for players. We are assigning the tracker for Team 2. We are registering a checkpoint pad. Again, that part is optional. That's not necessary here for a 1v1. Alright, and we're going to assign tracker Team 2. And then timer device, of course, that's the timer that's in the team picker room area. We're disabling that as a failsafe. Alright, and you're definitely going to need those failsafes because you never know when you're going to need a plan B. Alright, so that's going to complete the tutorial for part 3, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope it's been helpful. Don't forget to stay tuned for part 4 coming up. This will be the last part where we go over the game end room and we do a play test. Alright, you guys, that's going to do it for this one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!